Yeah, my name's Larry Rehmann. Good afternoon, everybody. I've been in the food industry for approximately 25 years now. Worked for major companies like Diamond Foods and Eckerd Frozen Foods and Superior Nut and Candy out of Chicago. Um, I've been, I guess, always interested in the food safety side, always committed to the food safety side. Grew up in at a time when food safety was growing, and continue on in the food safety right now. So I look forward to today's talk.
Awesome, John. Do you want to jump in on your end?
Sure. My name is John Raede. I've been in the food industry for about 35 years. Started in on the hoof, so to speak, in the cattle industry, and then graduated from Cal Poly San Luis Obispo, and then went on to meat processing in the poultry industry and red meat industry. And then I worked for started with a company called Chef America. They made a product called Hot Pocket. And that's when I got into, I was production before, then I got more on, I started working in more on the quality side, doing audits of our suppliers. And then Nestle USA purchased Hot Pockets. And so then I moved to Nestle USA, spent probably about almost 20 years with them, and retired in 2018. And I've been a food safety consultant ever since.
Great. Well, we're so glad to have you, John and Larry. And the theme of this is for food safety culture, building up from bottom to top to bottom. So I will just let Larry maybe kind of jump in and talk about your experience in food safety culture.
Well, I think from a food safety culture, and I always like to start our discussions that we have on many other subjects that we've had, with a definition, and the one that I put together is quite simple. It's a food safety culture, refers to a specific culture of a company, the attitudes, belief, practices, and values that determine what is happening when no one is watching. It's the result of a commitment from leadership and focus across the organization. And that kind of sums it up in a nutshell, but really what it requires is, and I'm a top-down believer, Patty. I think it starts at the top. It starts with the CEO or the general manager, whoever is the leader of the organization. A good culture is one where everybody knows their expectation. They know their jobs properly. They follow procedures, even when it's difficult, which most times it is, which John can attest to. And no one is watching, which is incredibly important in our industry. Management makes decisions on food safety that don't necessarily just have to do with the bottom line. Employees are encouraged to report food safety issues to their supervisors and management. These are all things that I think make up a culture from the top down all the way throughout the organization.
Excellent. And John, what about you? What does food safety culture look like for you?
Well, and I agree 100% with Larry. It has to be generated at some point, and it has to be kind of worked through the system and usually it starts with the top down, and you need the leadership team. But the leadership team has to be engaged on the floor, and that's where it's all happening, and that's where you are. As a profit center, as a company that's manufacturing a product, and in the food industry, we're very concerned about safety. And so it really has to be present with everyone on the floor. And you have to live it. I worked with a gentleman at Nestle, Chuck Reagan. He was the vice president of purchasing. He had a great saying. And he always said that if you're going to buy red meat, you better have bloody boots. And if you're going to buy fish, you better stink. And the point being, you have to know what you're purchasing, and we all have to know what we're manufacturing. We have to know all the ingredients that are involved. We have to understand all the packaging materials. We have to understand storage. We have to understand all these things. There's a lot of pieces and components to this. And as much as the people can understand within their sector, whatever they're working in, they have to understand why. They have to understand the why of what they're doing. And I think as managers and leaders of industry, we have to be able to help people understand the reasons as to why we're asking them to do the things they're doing, and then understand it. And I always relate it to people with their families and at home. And one time we were kind of focused on foreign material when I was at Nestle in the pizza division, and we went and sprinkled around a bunch of different items on a pizza, and we had a luncheon, and we had this one pizza sitting off to the side, and we asked them, "Would you eat that?" And they said, "No, we would not." And we said, "Well, okay, so that's why we asked you to, to really try to really work the program to control the foreign material, because this is not how we want to run our business." So I agree 100%. And I just want to say on the side, thank you both for inviting me to this. I think this is a great program. And if we can help other professionals out there understand, why this is important, why we do what we do, and how it benefits the business. It's all about brand protection, and you protect your brand by not hurting people.
Yeah, I'll add to that. I think it's certainly brand protection, but it's also protecting your customers. It's putting safe food into the business in itself, into the environment. And as a CEO and a senior manager, my entire career. It's the most important things we can do is obviously provide sufficient money and time, that's allocated to food safety and training. Training is a big thing, not only to get up and running, but the continuous ongoing training, and make sure your plans are adjustable. Things change as time goes on. Food safety, it becomes a living document. That's always changing. And then senior management reinforces food safety culture by regularly attending food safety meetings, and then obviously all the analytics that go along with it, and so forth. So, and I agree with John 100%. It's important, and I never saw this more clearly at Eckert and some of the other places that I worked. But people want to know why they're doing the things that they're doing, and it's incredibly important. The single most important attribute or important thing for a food safety program is culture. There's a lot of factors that drive a food safety system: environment, regulations, people, systems, and time. But the single most important thing driving a food safety system is culture.
And that's to your point, Larry, I'm supporting you on this, is that training is important, but training isn't always sitting in a room somewhere looking at PowerPoint slides. Training can happen within, a couple seconds, or just having a conversation with somebody, or reinforcing. You see a best practice out there, and somebody's really understanding it and enabling that. That's training as well. When you walk up to somebody, say, "Hey, thank you for that. That was excellent how you caught that." And prevention's a big thing in food safety, and that's what we're all about: is preventing risk mitigation, and I just think it's important to communicate as clear as you can, and talk to people. And I don't mean to think down to somebody, or down to their level, but it has to make sense to them. And so when you're talking to a forklift operator, or you're talking to somebody that's packing, closing boxes and doing things, and on a cartoner, things like that, they have to understand what their piece of that, what they're doing, how that is so important and so vital within that process, and then they'll take ownership of it.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. And I love it because you've both given examples of, Larry, you're saying, hey, it starts from the top. And John, you're saying too that, like, hey, your boots better be bloody, or you better stink if you're dealing with fish. As you're talking about training, I'd love to hear both of you. And then I've got one as well, just an example of what food safety culture looks like. Maybe it was a bad example. Maybe it was like, hey, this is a really great example. Yeah, either of you have one that jumps to mind, just like really good concrete examples of food safety culture?
Yeah, I think as I grew up in the industry, in the food safety world, when I was at Diamond Foods, we were an in-shell processing plant, not necessarily a food grade plant. And when we got involved with our glazed products and our other advanced snacking products at Diamond Foods, we decided we were going to run those products in Illinois, where we had a plant. And we became a food grade facility, and the new procedures had to be written, policies had to be written, training had to be done. everybody was on board, and we passed our very first audit at that time. So I think that was a really good example of, and people understood why. To John's point again, people understood why we were doing it. And I'll always fall back to protect the brand, protect the consumer. I think those are the two key basis points of the food safety system. And, it doesn't take much in a recall. The Food Marketing Institute and the Grocery Manufacturing Association, the average cost of a recall is $10 million. And that comes in terms of direct costs, lost sales, brand equity deterioration. So I think, that's an example when we did that at Diamond Foods, where we turned basically an in-shell processing plant into a food grade facility in about 6 months' time.
Wow. That's awesome. John, what about you?
Well, this one still, I live with this one every day. And I was in Nestle in the corporate office, and I was walking by, and we had the consumer complaint. And so I would just go by there and listen to what was happening. We had a database of all the different incidents, and then we would be able to take those incidents and kind of trace them back through the process to the ingredient, or, was it something that was done in one of our factories, or was it something that we purchased? And I remember hearing, and it just kind of happenstance, I was walking by and I heard a mother of a young child on the phone. It was live, and they had the tech put it on the speakerphone so we could all hear it, and just the distress in her voice, because we had a product with poultry in it, and the child, it was a 4-year-old child, bit into the product, and there was a piece of a collarbone called a pulley bone, and it had lodged in the roof of the child's mouth. And you could hear the distress in that mother's voice as she was calling in and about it, and describing the incident and giving all the information. So that one hit me right between the eyes, and I said, this has to stop. And so worked with a good friend of mine, Tom Harrington. He was there at Nestle, and he and I were both kind of managing the supplier side. So we went to the poultry convention in Atlanta, and it was within a month. And we did our research, and we figured out that X-ray would be the best way to use that. We found about 3 or 4 different vendors for that. And we had all of our suppliers, all of our poultry suppliers and meat suppliers come in, because it was red meat as well. And we played that call. We had a recording of it.
Wow.
And you could see it on their faces. And then we showed them the different type formats and different technology and machinery that we had in play on the X-ray side. And we said, who's in with us? And every single one of them raised their hands. And we deployed, I think it was something like 72 different units were immediate.
Wow.
And we cut down. So we used to have we measured it, and they measured on AQLs and actual quality limits. And then we measured them as well on our side. And we took from 1 bone per 2,000 pounds down to 1 bone per 10,000 pounds. And
wow.
that was a big win. But it's one of those things where, and throughout your career, you're gonna have things that hit you. My other one is, and it's on a human safety side, is, I saw a bolt sticking out of a camshaft on a jacketed kettle, and I wrote it down. I was walking through, and I was in one of our factories, and I wrote it down. And then, and I was sitting in this QA manager, and before I could get to my office, somebody had grabbed that bolt, had grabbed that person by the glove. They had a cotton glove with a latex over it, grabbed it, and popped their elbow, just boom. And right then and there, I said, I'll never, ever walk by another safety issue. If I see it, I'm going to stand there and make sure it gets taken care of. And then that thought process applies, because there's an adage out there, and Larry knows this for sure, is that if you're focused on food safety, human safety is right there, because you're compliant, and you're looking out for things, and you're trying to be preventive. And that whole preventive mindset carries the day.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, that's a great example. My example is I was in a facility, and they're like a top 10 food producer. And it was when we were doing some allergen testing stuff, and it was about 2 a.m, and we had to open a piece of equipment to check for allergens. And it was, middle of the night, production, sanitation changeover, second shift. And we were with like a manager, director there, and she said, "Hey, can you open this?" And he said, "No, it's in our our food safety SOPs that we can't open this unless it's this QA tech that does it." And so then he got the QA tech. He was the one that opened it, and I just love that story because it's like character is, who you are when no one's watching, but I think food safety culture is who you are when no one's watching as well. And so I just always love that, where it's like second shift guy is saying, no, these are our SOPs and we're going to hold everyone accountable to it, which was really awesome.
And that's gone through this, you know what I mean? To your point, it's gone all the way down to where it needs to be. It has to be set out there. It has to be talked about. You have to have standard operating procedures and, the sanitation operating procedures and all that. But if it's not alive on the floor, it's just a document sitting somewhere electronically or in a binder on a shelf. And it has to be alive on the floor.
Mm-hmm. So how do you do that? How do you go from, hey, we built the document, which for some smaller companies, that might be a win in itself. But how do you go from, keeping, Larry, you said, how do you make it a living document?
Well, I think there's the initial training that's done to get people on board. There is continual follow-up on the floor, to John's point, to make that a live document on the floor. And that, to a certain extent, means policing it, not to be in a negative way, but people have to be doing what the SOP says to be doing. And then we used to have, in all the companies that I worked for, we used to do annual retreats. As in your world, as you know it, Patty, a retreat. We called it a day off site, basically where we got everybody together, supervisors and up, and we discussed about why we have food safety. We discussed policies and procedures. We had individual training, and we kept it fun. I think John came to one once at Eckert where we did that, and those were really, really successful. So it really comes down to effective communication, training, and as John would say, doing on the floor.
And were those offsites for everybody?
They were for the quality group, quality and manufacturing group.
Awesome.
Yeah, then they carry that message, and they keep it alive. It's when I was at Nestle, I had 174 different suppliers that I we had an auditing group, but then we went in and made them better, so to speak, or helped them, because we learned a lot of things that were, we could transfer non-proprietary information to other manufacturing types. And so I was mainly frozen vegetables, red meat, and poultry. And then I had some ancillary suppliers as well. But it was very important to be able to carry that message and then help them understand. And then understand who you were working with, because it was international. And I was in Central America, South America, China, and I did a little bit in Europe. And so the whole thing was, even though there might have been some communication barriers there, but, face to face, eyeball to eyeball, walk on the floor, seeing or understanding what that culture was, and then helping them. So, as a customer, sometimes it's actually a little harder, and it can be a little harder, but it also, there's also that financial component of it as well. So it gives them a little more impetus, and not only just do the right thing, but then also, if you were able to do the right thing, then we're able to give you more business. And if you don't put us in danger, then we'll reward you for that. And I just think that it's important to, it doesn't matter, however, because it's a universal language. And walking around, and if you're there and we had interpreters and things like that, but it wasn't needed. But a lot of times you could see it in their eyes, that they understood, they got it. And we would show pictures, and sometimes I would bring things back to some of my domestic suppliers. They'd send us a scoop or a tape gun or something, and I'd bring it back to them. I said, hey, you don't need to send us these as well, because we have our own. And then, you could see their faces, there's like, oh boy. And but whatever the manner, whatever it's in your toolbox to use, again, it's that communication piece. How do they understand? How can I help this person understand the importance of what we're saying? And then we even created supplier quality colleges, Larry came to a couple of those, and
Mhm.
we would do those, and that's where we would share a lot of information. And again, disseminate information. How can I help them understand where we're at and what we're at, why we're asking this? And then once they get it, then they run on their own, and they'll do far more than what my thought process was. They would, because they was very specific to what they were doing, and then they would just run with it. We knew who got it, and that was kind of gave you the warm and fuzzy, so to speak.
Yeah, we always tried to deliver the big picture, safe food for consumers and so forth. But food safety is just so impactful across the board, and we try to always touch upon the food safety program is really what helps you meet regulatory standards, and there's a lot of them out there now. There's a lot going on. It maintains the brand loyalty. To John's point, we had many of those visits by Nestle. And it always surrounded about, for lack of better words, if you want to continue to do business with Nestle, here's our recommendations. Prevent recalls. I mean, we all know that recalls are just off the chart again as we speak right now. And then provide safe food for customers. I mean, that's really what we're trying to do. And we try to get everybody to think that, would you put that piece of food on your own plate at your own home? Try to give everybody that broad perspective of what food safety really is and why it matters so much.
And it's interesting when you listen to the folks on the line. There was on one of the poultry deboning lines, they had what was called a breast puller, and so somebody with a knife in one station would make the cuts, and then they had an individual there that would pull the breast meat down. Well, that's right where that pulley bone is, and that individual quietly, we were walking on the line showing out, and they just deployed the x-rays, and so walking line, and that individual pointed out that if they could cut just a little bit farther down, that when they did the breast pull, that it wouldn't take the pulley bone off the carcass, or the football as they call it. It wouldn't take that off, and so just that one little thing was an immediate reduction in the potential to have that piece of bone stay on that, because if nothing is fallible, and x-rays they're very good, and they're continually to increase their technology and their detectability. But just having that one individual understand the process and say, hey, if we do this, then we'll reduce this, because you don't even want it on there in the first place. And that's how it works.
It sounds like, from hearing both of you, it sounds like for building a food safety culture, the first step is like getting everyone to understand why, which is to keep people safe when they're eating. So John, you playing that clip of the woman whose son was eating that. And then the second step is like, how do we keep food safe? And so for that example, it's cutting a little bit further, or, hey, using the x-ray machine this way. Those sound like the first two steps, is like the why and the how. Is there anything else that you guys think is super crucial to building a food safety culture?
The only thing I'll add to that, Patty, I think the very first thing is there's a corporate vision that should incorporate a food safety comment in there. And Eckert was very simple. We're going to provide safe food. And I think that's really where it begins. It begins with that commitment from the top, the people who hold the purse strings, the people who are mitigating or managing the risk of food safety. It really begins there, and then everything flows below normally.
And it's that consistent application. You have to have consistent, and it doesn't matter who's there. Everybody. It has to be interchangeable. It can't just, oh wait, well, I don't know anything about it. I work on the line. I'm right here. I don't know anything about it. We have a QA or a QC person that does. No, they have to understand. Because a QA or QC person, that's, they're not always going to be there, and they're doing other things. And so, it's that consistent application of that overall, to Larry's point, there has to be laid out. It has to be a corporate mantra, to provide the funds. I mean, think about that. The company buys, 75 x-rays. I mean, that was a corporate decision right there, because it had to be funded, and it was an investment, and they understood that. And that's what it takes. And then the people see that when they see things come in, and there's action and energy behind it, and people are focused on it. That's catching. And and people will glom onto that because then they feel like my job's important. They want, people want, verification of what they're doing, and they want to have that significance in the organization, no matter what they're doing. They have to feel that what they're doing is significant to the organization, and that's how they contribute.
Yeah. What are the biggest challenges? You just mentioned funding, John. What are the biggest challenges to food safety culture, to doing those things you mentioned?
I think, it's changed. Sometimes it's a change of the strategy, change of procedures, change. And so we all know how people are with change. And so that's where we have to mitigate that type of, where they're like, what? Oh, what are we doing? Oh, no, well, we've always done it this way. Well, we're not going to do it that way anymore. And here's why. And, to your point, Patty, is here's why, and here's how we're going to do it. Is there anything you would like to add to that? Is there something that we're missing? See, now I'm bringing them in. I'm encouraging them. I'm enveloping them in what we're doing. And then when they bring up certain things, as to a lot of times people will tell you why something can't be done. And you have to listen to that. And you can't just blow them off or just talk over them. You have to really listen to what they're saying, because maybe they're going to tell you something that it won't work that way. And then they might have the solution for you.
Yeah, I think the biggest challenge definitely is on the people side, getting the commitment from middle management, floor management, supervisors, getting that commitment to the food safety culture, that their eyes are always open. And then certainly in the industries that I worked in, where we had many, many seasonal people, it was always an ongoing challenge to make sure everybody got that message all the way down in the organization. I think that's the biggest challenge in food safety, in developing that culture, is the people itself.
Yeah. So it's maintaining it, getting the people involved and educated.
Yep.
Consistent application.
Yeah. And John, you said once people get, like, kind of have the resources and the tools, that they normally are off to the races. What does it look like to maintain a food safety culture? If you want to throw in your story that you shared with me the other week about, picking up I think it was the wood off the floor, I think that could be a good example.
Yeah, and again, it goes back to, it's not just hey, we're going to do this and everybody, yay, we're all good, and then everybody goes back to what they were doing. So, trust but verify. You have to have verification procedures in place that these things are continuing to happen, and then set the example. So that story that you spoke of, I was helping. I contract with a company, and they used a lot of wooden pallets. And so when I first kind of started walking the floor, I was managing their food safety programs for all three facilities. And so walking the floor, it looked like a lumber yard in there. I mean, just shrink wrap and so pace, man. They were fast paced and performance driven. That's what we said at Nestle. And these guys were rocking. But the thing is, it only takes a second or two to pick up. And so not only is a human safety hazard, where, occupational safety hazard, where somebody's going to trip on shrink wrap or step on a piece of that on a polished, concrete floor, they step on a piece of wood, down they go. It's also, now we have this giant foreign material issue, because it gets everywhere. Yeah. And so I just started picking it up. And so when I was doing my daily walks, and I just started picking up stuff. There was trash bins around. And I never said a word to anybody. And because it wasn't like, oh, look at me, I'm picking up stuff, aren't I great? No, it needed to be done. These guys were running around, getting product out. And so I just started picking up stuff. Probably within 2 weeks, that floor was clean. Every time I'd go out there, it was clean. And I think some mistake is that we do earlier in our careers, as we point things out. We don't provide a solution. So especially on either manufacturer or on the quality food safety side, is you go, hey, I noticed that there's a lot of wood on the floor. Can you guys, kind of get that taken care of? And then write it on your GMP notes, and then put it into a corrective action or something like that, and then it's gone. You have to make those things real, like we talked about before. It has to be real, and don't be afraid to do it. Don't be afraid. Go out there and set the example. And just because it's just part of something that needs to get done, the folks will pick up on that. You're not trying to make a point, and you're just consistent application, and that's something. And then pretty soon it goes away, and then you're moving on to the next thing, and then you build on that. And when you can build on that, and everybody gets it, because our job as managers, leaders, is to create the next manager leader. That's what we do. And so that's the sign of success. When a manager, you go on vacation, that operation runs the same. It doesn't change whether you're there or not, because of the front work that you did.
Great. Larry, on your side, any stories jump to mind for you of, hey, there was a challenge to implementing some sort of food safety culture side of things and you guys overcame it?
Yeah, I think I'll go back to the diamond, going from a in-shell processing facility to a food grade facility, which required, everybody to dress differently. It required a whole new set of procedures for hygiene, all the way on down. And if you think of all the food safety regulations there are now and what we had to encompass to be that food grade facility, I think that was something that our team did very, very well.
Oh, that's great. And then I guess, John, Larry, we said this before, and I had the technical issues early, so I didn't get to toot your guys' horns. But you guys have been in the industry forever. You're just very experienced, very respected. And for this, we are hoping that someone who's earlier in their career in quality food safety production can take something away from it. For you guys, if you had to say, like, hey, what's one practical step for establishing food safety culture, what would be that one word of advice you'd give?
I would one word of advice I would give to somebody with the food safety program is perseverance. There are many, many roadblocks that you run into. There are many, many challenges. Persevering in food safety is what makes a successful program.
Great.
It's hard to say one step because it's like everything, right? It's always complicated and convoluted, but I think it's just having that defining principle, and that the defining principle in your mind is that, is understand the process. And then, it goes back to the Codex HACCP, right? It's identifying the risk. But sometimes that's kind of focused on one part of the process. But everything has a risk. And so if you have to understand that process. And the way you understand it is by talking to the folks, learning from them, gaining, that inside knowledge, right? And then just gain as much knowledge as you can about that process so you can identify the risks and then start to build that program. That's the one. You have to have a really good understanding of what you're walking into.
Yeah, absolutely. And I guess I'd love to hear, kind of as we're wrapping up, you both talked about kind of food safety being a profit center as we were prepping for this conversation. How do you think about framing that for maybe not everyone gets a CEO as great as Larry that cares about food safety? How do you frame that as food safety as a profit center? When you're pushing for food safety initiatives.
I look at food safety as a competitive advantage. I think in today's food world and the companies that are producing food for consumers, it is the most critical part of the company, above operations and marketing and things like that. I mean, it's very simple. The consumer is so well versed now in recalls and such that they'll turn from a product just based on some bad information that might be coming out. So I think food safety is critical. Culture is critical to that food safety program. And, going forward, I think you got to keep those two things in mind. It's protect your brand, protect the consumer. It means that much to the company.
Absolutely.
The one difficulty that I think we have in the quality food safety side is that it's hard to monetize to show something, monetize something that didn't happen.
Right.
And that's the difficulty. And I think that's where, because, and somebody that's in sales, here it is, I got the contract and here we go. And so that's an immediate, where on our side of the business, it's, all right, well, nothing happened. So, okay, great. But I think, and to Larry's point, what we can use is that kind of that data that's out there, the current past data that, somebody went through a similar situation and it did hurt them, it did turn into a recall. And as Larry brought up, they're very expensive. We had 6 pieces of foreign material in one of the divisions, and it was about a $5 million recall.
Wow.
And you never gain that back. To Larry, what Larry touched on, either just by brand damage, and nobody was hurt in that one. But that's a tough one. So just if you understand that going in, that it's hard to monetize something that doesn't happen, but we have enough data out there that we can compare that. If we are not doing this, this is what can happen. And the likelihood is out in front of us. We see it all the time. And so I think once you can make that connection, yes, we prevented that, but we and by prevention, we didn't put ourselves into this position. And that's a pretty quick sell.
Yeah, I think I just want to reiterate, I agree with what John's saying, and I think I'm summarizing that food safety is a competitive advantage. It's not a profit center.
Great. No, that makes sense. It sounds like, John, it helps to actually quantify compared to recalls or compared to product spoilage, whatever it may be. The more you can tie a number to it, maybe the better, the more effective it is, or a competitive advantage, like you said, Larry.
Right.
Yeah, it is. It's definitely a selling point. I mean, look at with the third-party audits right now under the GFSI umbrella. I mean, those are mandatory. People say, before, back in Larry and I, early in our careers, it was just kind of if there was any type of auditing, it was either through a regulatory agency, which was, here and there, unless you're where you have ICC right there. But the thing is that, if we can as the auditing started taking place and gaining shape, and Walmart, all right, we're going to do this umbrella now, and now it's mandatory. Nobody will even look at you unless, when you're vetting a new supplier, what's the first thing you ask for? You want to see their third party audit. You want to see their allergen statements. You want to see, all the different things that clearly pertain, because the sale can't happen unless somebody in the food safety side gives them the thumbs up.
Yeah.
And that's the key part. When I was with Chef America, R&D, purchasing, and myself, we all traveled together. Russ Shore, wow. Bob Pankey, we all went out together. And we would look at factories together, and we all had our perspective on it. And then we gained the understanding of so that helped me understand also while I was by myself and a supplier, I would look for what new items are they doing? And then on the purchasing side, how efficient are they? And are they, controlling their costs? And then on top of that was the food safety side. And then in the reverse too, purchasing went out, or if R&D went out, they were looking at it through my eyes, because we all kind of talk to each other. What are you looking at? Why are you looking at that? And
think of the frozen food conference that you went to, Patty. Think of the attendees at that event. Basically, you had CEOs, you had sales executives, and everybody had their food safety people there.
Yeah, to get the final sign off.
That's right.
That's it. When Larry and I, we used to go to Affy all the time, right? The frozen vegetable, and there was in the initial part, they didn't have food safety, and Nestle didn't have somebody from food safety. We said we need to be in the room. And then when either a vendor at the time or a potential, they come in and we'd say, where's your food safety person? So then we changed that too. So then it's like, we want your quality person here. We want to talk to somebody about what you're doing and how are you preventing things? And it changed. It's definitely a part of it now, which is good.
Yeah, that is great. And that leads to kind of the final question. We'll run a little over time if you guys are willing, but would love to hear, how have you seen kind of the food safety culture change, building a food safety culture? How's that changed in your careers? and how do you think it'll change in the next 20 years?
I think the biggest change that I saw is that food safety in the initial days was about your policies and procedures. And there was generally an audit performed, and you may not even be running the floor. I mean, you may not even be running product at the time. To where it is now, where you have your policies and procedures, and food safety audits generally do look at your books and look at your records and so forth, but they spend an enormous amount on the time. Are the people doing what they're supposed to be doing on the floor? That's the biggest change that I saw. And then obviously the amount of regulations that are out there have increased. FDA and the BRC, SQF, all those different organizations are out there now. And John probably knows more than I do on that. It's just ratcheted up. And I think a lot of that is coming from people are tiring of the recalls. 97% of food safety outbreaks involve manufacturer error or malpractice. That's a big number. That's a big number. And basically, the system breaks down somewhere. The last example I'll give you is when you used to have a food safety incident in the early days, you would send your corrective action and you'd be done. Now it's an indictment on your whole food safety policy, procedure, controls. Corrective actions are still necessary, obviously, but it's much more impactful. It's much more broad in terms of how you answer and how you fix it.
Yeah.
And rightfully so.
Yes, I agree.
I think it's you'd like to say that it's overbearing right now with all the food regulations and things like that, but look at the recalls that are occurring, particularly with allergens, which I know is personal to you, Patty.
Absolutely.
It's look at that, and those are things that can be mitigated in the long run. They can be and should be.
Yep.
Yeah. John, what about you? How have you seen it change, and where do you think food safety culture is going?
I think it's definitely integrating. Now it's going up, integrating up and down, right? Because the financial side, on the top of the house, and then down in the production side, and on the QA side. I think it's understandable because of we keep hammering on this point, and to Larry's point as well, is that because of the liability that's out there right now, it's driving a lot of this, which sometimes, unfortunately, that has to happen. The other side is the data collection technology. I think that is where this is really I'm seeing changes, say, in the last 10 years, being able to collect real-time data and to be able to make decisions based on data. That's our biggest thing was well, what happened? Well, when? Well, I don't know. Well, we need to go talk to this individual or that. Now we have it because there's so much monitoring going on out there, the trust but verify. And process validation is a huge thing. And that's driving. And so people are getting more into validating their process and then doing their verification throughout the shifts. And then that data collection, and then capturing that data, and then manipulating that data, and then being able to show that data to people in a way that they understand it. I think that's where this industry is really gaining, and that's where the big opportunity is right now, is that data collection piece. And then the last one is, I think what we're seeing now, because before the auditing, the third-party auditors were just kind of out there, and they weren't receiving the training that they are now. I think the quality of the auditors that we're seeing now in the third party, and they're being standardized, the training's there, the SQF, BRC, FSSC 22000, and those the big three, they're really, spending a lot of money and time and energy into that. And we're also seeing in the auditing side is that there's a lot of people who have this just incredible amount of historical data and information, and now they're and then in the latter parts of their career, some the percentage of them are in the latter part of their career mostly, and they've worked for big organizations, and they're out there now in the field, and a lot of, as a third party auditor, you're not supposed to consult, right? but I think just the questions that they're asking and what they're looking at and how they're framing up those audits, the audits more what the what the standards are and what they're looking for. I think that's helping quite a bit, and having that annual audit and then having the audit prep is a big thing too. So that's keeping people engaged in that process and looking at their systems. And then again, with the technology to be able to manipulate that data and share with it real time, I think that's huge. And I think that's going to drive for the next, 40 years.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much, both. This was a masterclass on food safety culture, and really appreciate both your time. And we will wrap up the stream right now.
My pleasure, Patty.
Thank you, Patty. Thank you.